Hey guys, hope the day is going well for you. Let's see if we can get a better view of my painting table. That's a little better, kind of. Okay, it's close enough. But it's been a while since I put out a video, a lot because, you know, it's with my kids and everything. It's just there's no time, basically. It's just hard to find time to do this and sit down and then upload the video. Have been painting a little this morning, getting some things done. I do have a history lesson at the end of this, so don't worry. I will follow through with my promise. I've been working on a couple more War Machine models. This is Tristan Durant. There we go. What's his name? This is the model from Gen Com. It was a Privateer Press exclusive, and the owner of the shop that I go to play went to Gen Com, and so I sent money with him and he picked one up for me. Or one of the workers at the shop, and so it's pretty nice. I'm not done with him yet. I've got to go back and got to do some more of the white on his shoulder pads and on his, just basically go over all the white trim again and again and again. The chest piece needs a lot of white work, and then I got to go over all the gold. The red I'm actually pretty happy with, so I'm not going to tinker with that too much. Funny story about this one is that I almost had him completely painted and ready for his well, the base coat's almost completely on, ready for the Army Painter Quick Shade, and I dropped him. He was sitting on I have a glass jar full of sand that I use to hold so that I can paint these guys, and I dropped him and he fell like this, hit the ground spear first, bent the spear almost double, and chipped a whole bunch of paint off the body, and knocked most of the paint off the spear. And so I had to strip it and paint it again and go back over it, which was a pain in the butt. This is Fiora, Priestess of the Flame, or Protectorate of the Flame, I think, because she's got all these stupid exhaust vents on her back, because evidently her heart fire is chock full of goodies and goodnesses. And you can tell that I'm still painting this one. In fact, I'll probably be painting the upper layers of white on her in just a minute. I will have to go over all her gold trim as well, because the quick shade, it just really dulls down the gold. It goes over it and makes it very dark, very difficult to see the points out of it. But I am pretty glad that I got her painted. The quick shade really helped keep these things on the back, these 6 little metal things, because this is all metal. Her arm here is pinned, her axe arm is pinned. All 6 of these things are pinned onto her back with really itty bitty teeny weensy brass rod, because I had to drill. It was just a pain. I've had to strip this model twice, pull all the pins out, and then repin it even more than, I guess, about half dozen times, just to keep her from falling apart. Like even her waist here, the torso into the body is pinned. Luckily the head is a piece of the upper part of the body, so I didn't have to pin that. But oh geez, that was such a pain in the butt to pin this model. But she's pinned now, and then the quick shade seeped into the holes. Like I super glued the pins in, but there were still like little bits of give, and they would wiggle. And it was a pain. But the quick shade seeped into there, and then the lacquer solidified and really boosted the pin strength for these and also the other arms. So I'm hoping that helps hold it on. We'll see. My biggest goal is to not drop her at all, ever, because if I drop her, she'll just go into a drawer and never get pulled out, I guess. Or if I do, I may just fill in the holes on her back and not put these things on. Even though, I mean, it looks really cool, but it's a pain in the butt to make and to put together and to keep going. But yeah, she comes with a special base. Hang on a second. Hey doggy, you guys see my dog escaped there. It's a flame base, and again, it's a metal base. And this I've had to strip, and well, actually, no, I haven't had to strip this. I had to touch up, because it being metal, pieces of it chipped off. I'm kind of tempted to put brown, like on the upper ends of the flame, maybe a little brown and black, to make it look a little bit more like smoke. But I'm also afraid to tinker too much, because you don't want to make leave well enough alone is what you want to do. But overall, that's what I've been working on. I am not sure when I'm going to get to Warboss Tay's painting challenge. It may not happen this year for me, just because, again, with the kids, I have to snatch 4 or 5 minutes of time, maybe 30 minutes of a time to get things painted up, and then I have other things to do when they're not home. My big kid's playing soccer now, as well as playing violin. My younger son is he's 3, almost 4, and so he just needs constant supervision whenever he's home, and so it's just hard to find time to do stuff, not only just paint, but also do other things as well. But also, I've been toying with the idea. A friend of mine was recently diagnosed with throat cancer, and he's in his early 50s, I think, late 50s, and very young for it, and he's going through radiation treatment. But the reason they found out he had throat cancer is that he went through gallbladder surgery, and they noticed, the anesthesiologist noticed it. So he's having a tough time. So I was going to make him something and give it to him, just to kind of give him a spirit boost, I guess. So we'll have to see if that's actually that is going to be next on my list of things to do. But that's rather sad and depressing, and so you don't come here for that. Let's go on. I'll go ahead and I'm going to add the final highlight to Fiero. For those of you who remember bad 80s sports cars. Do that, and then I'll talk to you some about the Samnite Wars in ancient Rome. Samnites were a people who lived east and a little south of the old Roman Republic. And the Samnite Wars happened in the 340s to about the 290s, about 10 years before Pyrrhus of Epirus showed up and started the whole Pyrrhic conflict and the conflict with Tarentum way down south and east of Rome. And they were a mountain people who lived up in the high mountains. They were still very Italian in that their kit and equipment was similar to the Romans, though not as heavy infantry focused as the Romans. The Roman army was very much heavy infantry focused. This is why they didn't do so well against the Parthians a couple centuries later. Is that they're really good at marching in and fighting somebody toe to toe and then beating the snot out of them there, but not so good at fighting mobile or non-heavy infantry people. And so the Samnites, they were mountain folk. They were more tuned to fighting people up on the high mountains. Oops, let's go in so you don't have to stare at my big beer gut. So they were, like I said, they were more used to fighting up in the high mountains with each other. And so when the Romans came, the Romans were much more used to fighting down on kind of the low plains and flatter regions where heavy infantry could be deployed much more efficiently. And so understandably, the Romans were not very excited to go up into the mountains and fight the Samnites, and the Samnites were not very excited to go down out of the mountains and fight the Romans. And so that for a lot of the first Samnite War was just kind of skirmishes, and then the second they declared peace. You know, they said, okay, we're done, let's not fight each other, with minimal concessions on each side. But Romans never willing to leave well enough alone. A small city south of Rome was being pressured by the Samnites to give up stuff, and so they called to Rome for help. The Romans declared that they would protect these guys. The Samnites said, well, them's fighting words, and war breaks out again, and it goes really well for the Romans first off, and they go through and they capture some 80 Samnite villages, and the Samnites come and they beg for peace, and the Romans say, ha ha ha, we're not going to give you peace unless you admit that we dominate all of Italy. And the Samnites are like, well, we weren't ready for that, we're not going to say that. And so they leave, and the Romans resume their campaign against the Samnites. And just a few weeks later, the entire Roman army that's in Samnia gets the Appian and Livy and those guys. They don't really explain how it happened, but they get captured in a long valley, or a narrow valley where they can't get out, and the Samnites are sitting at the front of the valley and the Romans are in the valley, and the Samnites aren't going to go in and fight them because, you know, that would be good for the Romans, but the Romans can't get up out of the valley and fight the Samnites because they are sitting at the entrance. Kind of like having to walk uphill and then fight a battle while all the time being pummeled by arrows and other things that are being thrown by the Samnites. Anyway, they're in a bad situation, and so they come out and they beg the Samnites for surrender terms. And the Samnites say you have to give up all your armor, all your weapons, and go home, and repudiate some of the various treaties, etc., etc. You know, they offer and the Romans aren't ready for those, so they go back in the valley and wait a few more days. But people are sick, people are dying, people are starving because there's no food. Since most of the army is there's not another Roman army anywhere near that can come and rescue them before things get terribly bad. And so the consuls have to surrender, because both consuls were there, if I remember correctly. And they surrender to the Samnites, and the Samnites make them give up all their arms and armor, let them have enough food and equipment to go home, to go back to Rome. But they make them do something very humiliating, which is to pass under the yoke. Now the yoke, it's not like an oxen yoke or anything like that, though that's kind of what they're implying. But what they did is they drove a couple of spears into the ground and tied a spear across them as a crossbeam, low enough to where you had to stoop or even kind of duck walk underneath it, and then forced the entire Roman army to pass under the yoke. They marched them through this. All 50,000 Roman citizens are forced to go under this contraption, and it was a very great mark of shame. So much so that some of the soldiers who came home, they waited till night to sneak into Rome, because it was such a shameful thing to have had done to them. And this, of course, outraged the Romans and eventually spelled the doom of the Samnites, because, you know, they never let that one go. But I found it interesting, you know, that this was still in a time when Rome was not routinely, but when they would go out and fight, they would lose from time to time. And, you know, it is recorded as a loss even by the Roman historians, which, you know, whenever you record that you got your butt whooped, you know it was a righteous butt whooping, especially in the old days. But anyway, I digress. So the Romans, they pick up their campaign again against the Samnites. They rearm, they get everybody mobilized again, and they go in and they start pushing into the Samnite territory again and again and again. And in one small city, the Roman army had laid siege to it, and there was not enough Romans to get in, and the Samnites were not enough people to push them away to break the siege, and so it kept going back and forth between them. The Samnites would send out little skirmishing parties if the Romans got too close or started moving their siege engines closer. Well, mostly it was ramps and towers and ladders. They didn't have many elaborate weapons at that point in Rome. Well, as elaborate as later. But one day there was a group of cavalry charged out of the Samnite city, and a Roman cavalry unit went forward and met them, and they skirmished, and they drive the Samnites back into the city. And they chase them all the way to the gates, where all the Romans stop and turn around, except for one guy who gets a little overzealous, and he charges into the city after the Samnite cavalry. And they go in and they scatter amongst all the streets, because, you know, they're in hot pursuit. They're not really looking behind them. They think everybody's right behind. Oh, the whole Roman unit has charged into the city, when it's just this one guy. And once he gets in, the Samnites close the doors behind him. And so the gates close. He's standing there in like the little square that's right behind the door, the gateway, and he says whatever Latin is for "oh shit." and looks around. There's all these guys starting to, bend their bows and pointing them at him, getting ready to do something to him, and he does quite possibly the smartest thing that he could have done at the time, and that is he puts the spurs to his horse and he takes off. He starts galloping through the city, and he's cutting through the corners. The Samnites are behind him, but he's moving faster than they can get word to the people on the other side of the city. And so after a very harrowing ride through the city, he comes to the other gates on the other side, which are still open, and he charges through and out into the open and goes around and rejoins his unit with, "Boy, guys, have I got a story for you," on his lips. And to me, that's pretty ballsy. That's also, cool thinking under pressure. And it's just amusing to me. It's just a small story, buried deep in some of the old Roman liturgy about soldiers and fighting and the Samnite Wars, which eventually gave them dominance over all of central Italy, and that's what brings them into conflict with Tarentum, which is what brings Pyrrhus of Epirus over into Italy, which is what brings Rome in contact and at first in collusion and in alliance with Carthage, which eventually falls apart and goes to the Punic Wars, which brings Hannibal to Rome. It's all just this big link of causality or causation. And so I just find that interesting. But one last story, and then I'll let you go, and I may pause the video and then add on later when I have finished painting Priestess Fiora here. But at the very toe of Italy, there's a little city, Messina, I believe is called. That's the modern-ish name. The Straits of Messina is the area that runs between Italy and Sicily. And there's a city on the toe of Italy on that side of it that the Romans had subdued and had a garrison in the city that was they weren't ruling the city, but they were there to make sure that everybody in the city respected Roman wishes and kept things together and did the right stuff according to Rome. And these guys in the garrison, they start thinking, well, these Messinans, they all have this stuff, especially some pretty hot wives. And so they kill them and take their wives and take all their stuff and give control of the city to one of the Roman guys. He's now in control of the city, and they've done a pretty heinous thing, even in the old Bronze Age and Iron Age standards of doing things. That is to kill people who had already surrendered, and then plunder their, just for the sake of plunder and of wealth. And so, they're not very well respected. The people in the city are rightfully very angry at the Romans. And so one day the leader of the Roman insurgency there, rebellion, tyranny, he develops an eye infection, and it's getting worse and worse, and so he knows he needs a doctor, and he knows he cannot ask anybody from Messina to doctor him because they're not going to be looking for his best interest. They're not going to be keeping an eye out for him. An eye out. And so he sends across the sea to the city on the other side in Sicily and asks for a doctor. And this one guy volunteers, says, "Oh, sure, I'll come over and I'll take a look at your eyes." And the doctor comes over and he says, "Okay, yeah, I know a great way to cure this." And he puts together a poultice. Says, "All right, this is going to hurt when you put it on your eyes, but if you're a man, you can hold it on long enough for it to heal." He challenges and says, "You have to man your way through the pain to feel good." And he puts the poultice on the guy's eyes, which it burns horribly. But the guy says, "Oh, it's just the medicine working. So yeah, all right. Well, you keep that on there. I'll be back in a little bit. And instead of being back in a little bit, he goes down, he gets on the boat and sails back across the strait, because that doctor who had volunteered had been born in Messina and had a lot of family in Messina. And so he had every reason to hold a grudge, just like the other people in Messina. And so his poultice was actually very caustic and corrosive herbs, and they burned out the guy's eyes. He kept them. He being challenged to his manhood, he kept the poultice on his eyes for 2 days, and then couldn't bear the pain anymore and had it taken off. And then the guys were like, "Oh, dude, no, you're gonna have to wear a blindfold now." And so that the guy knew he had been had. And eventually the guys who took over the city, they go back and they beg forgiveness from the Roman Senate, because the Senate hears what happens, and they get pissed, because this makes Rome look bad. It makes their treaties look like not trustable, and so it really damages their political reputation amongst the other citizens and cities in not only in Italy but also in the Mediterranean. And the Senate cannot have that. They need to be able to negotiate with people, especially since at this point Rome, though they were becoming strong, they were not the strongest nation in the Mediterranean by a long shot, as shown when Pyrrhus shows up and puts a whooping on them, even though it's not good for him either. But that's another story I've already told. And so they bring all these guys back to the city, and they say that the reason they plundered the city the way they had done so was because they had such debts that they owed in Rome to the wealthy, to the patrician class. There was no way they were ever going to repay them, and so they needed money to pay their debts, and that these debts were burdensome and overpowering and unfair. And the Roman Senate looks and they say, "You know what? You guys are right. This whole thing, all the debts that are owed, all the method of debt collecting, and the ability of the patricians to charge and do all this is way out of whack." And so they went through debt reform, forgave pretty much all the debts owed by everybody in the city of Rome, made a nice clean slate of it all, and then did debt reform. And so I thought that was interesting as well. You want some political reform, plunder a city and murder its inhabitants. That's a good way to get started. Though I do not recommend that one, so don't take that one to heart. But anyway, I'm going to keep painting. I'll let you guys go and do whatever it is that you are currently doing. I do enjoy watching people's videos. Mikey's Miscast, I've been watching your little stuff today. It's been looked pretty interesting. I'm gonna have to go back and catch the first videos. I saw the one where you were getting ready to paint the torture chamber table, so I'm gonna have to go and check all that out. Spookytoberfest for me is not gonna happen, like I said, because I've not even gotten a chance to do any of the painting challenge, which was months ago. Anyway, hope you guys are having a wonderful time, and hope that those of us on the East Coast here in the United States survive Hurricane Matthew. And if you're not on the East Coast in the United States, then you're probably not too worried. Well, if you're down in Haiti, I hope that you're doing all right too. They got it whooped pretty bad by that storm. Anyway, you guys have a good afternoon, and we'll see you later. Dun, dun, dun.